All right, welcome everyone. We'll call the Transportation Committee meeting to order of Monday, March 3rd, 2025. The time is 3:06 p.m. We are in room 1100 of the Minnesota Senate building. In accordance with the rules of the Senate, the following members will be participating remotely in today's hearing. Senator Pa from Brooklyn Park, Senator Herr from St. Paul. Quorum is present. Members, today we're simply going to have a presentation. Here we're going to hear from the Department of Transportation and Met Council, Metro Transit, on light rail projects. Quickly, by way of quick overview and summary, what brings us to this hearing and the reports on which we'll hear is an effort by the legislature to address concerns that had cropped up around Southwest Light Rail Transit project cost overruns, project delays, and the like. The idea at one time had been, in the response to a great deal of investigation and program review done by the legislative auditor at the request of the Audit Commission, at the behest of the legislature, was to grant the Department of Transportation the ability and the authority to construct light rail on behalf of the Met Council, as had been done with the Hiawatha line, which we now call the Blue Line, from downtown Minneapolis, between downtown Minneapolis and the Mall of America, including the airport. That didn't happen, so as a interim or a half measure, we did actually pass legislation that would create a collaboration, consultative kind of oversight role for the Department of Transportation, which has some expertise demonstrated in their ability to manage very, very large and expensive projects fairly successfully with the Met Council and Metro Transit, so that those outcomes perhaps could be better in the future when constructing such large-scale, really expensive capital investments on behalf of the public. I just wanted to remind ourselves of why the legislature was so concerned about the delays and the cost overruns, and I'll just summarize from just a couple of, there have been to date 4 intensive investigations, if you will, looks at this matter. One of them took the form of a simple memorandum that the legislative auditor wrote that kind of encapsulated the scale and scope of the problems that were beginning to emerge. That was done in October of 2021, which then triggered what they call a special review, which is kind of an intermediate program evaluation, which revealed some more detail about the dynamics that were giving rise to those concerns. That was submitted in September of 2022, which then gave way to a more intensive program evaluation, which turned out to be so extensive that it's been broken out into 3 parts. One part we're still waiting for. The first program evaluation, which came in March of 2023, encapsulated some of the findings around Metropolitan Council's decision-making, and the second one came a couple of months later in June of 2023, and that was an overview and analysis of Metropolitan Council's oversight of contractors. We're still waiting for an in-depth financial audit, which I understand should be forthcoming in just a few months. On the council decision-making, and I'm also now talking to MnDOT and the Met Council, these are some of the things we're hoping we'll hear from both of your agencies are addressed, and we'll have no concerns as we look at constructing future light rail transit, including the Blue Line. So I'm hoping we'll get some response to some of these issues. The FTA had raised concerns about the Met Council's ability to cover unexpected cost overruns. The council did not have enough funds to finish the project, nor enough funds to halt the project. No formal contingency plan for temporarily, permanently stopping the project, and no estimate for the costs that would incur by doing so. on scheduling and delays. The council solicited bids for the civil construction portion with no project specifications that knew to be incomplete. The fact that the Met Council added substantial new or changed work after the civil construction bidding process was complete caused the delay of the project schedule and increased costs. The Met Council did not hold its civil construction contractor accountable for repeated failures to provide an acceptable project schedule. The Met Council claimed that the construction delays were the responsibility of the Met Council, which the Met Council agreed to and then paid quite a bit for. The pre-construction engineering analysis performed by the Met Council contractors did not predict the Kenilworth LRT tunnel construction challenges that seriously delayed the project. The Met Council has not been fully transparent about the project's increasing costs, and the Met Council has not adequately communicated to the public the uncertainty surrounding its estimate of future costs. In its oversight of contractors, which I know that touches on a lot of that, but in more granular detail, some of the findings included change order, settled change order. The Met Council settled change order costs while allowing potential schedule delays to remain unresolved. The Met Council did not adequately limit the council's risk for future cost increases. And the Met Council paid its contractor even though it could not fully validate the contractor had incurred the costs it claimed. On the issue of independent cost estimates and change order negotiations, the council was found to direct its cost estimating consultant to systematically increase its independent cost estimates. The Met Council paid its civil construction contractor the price the contractor initially set for change orders about half the time, including in those instances when the independent cost estimates for the same change orders were significantly lower. The Met Council agreed to pay the civil construction contractor what it requested with little or no explanation for the council's conclusion that the costs were reasonable. The council did not adequately document its decisions or track costs related to nonconformance reports. The Met Council intended to deduct money for nonconforming work from future payments to the contractor, but it had not fully estimated the amount it planned to deduct and not collected adequate documentation to do so. The Met Council's original contract with its civil construction contractor did not provide sufficient mechanisms for the council to enforce contract requirements. So, members of the public, you can imagine why we thought it was a good idea, perhaps, that an entity that has some capacity to not run into some of these, fairly significant problems. These are, not the problems that an entity that regularly constructs 10, 20, 10, projects in the tens to the hundreds of millions of dollars does not encounter. This is just standard practice that wasn't followed by the Met Council. For whatever reason, other people thought it wasn't such a good idea. So we arranged for this opportunity for MnDOT maybe to give the Met Council its best professional and cultural and institutional experience so that the Met Council could do better. So they've done that, at least initially. I understand it went well. The Met Council's accepted everything MnDOT has had to say, but I wanted Mr. Greenfield maybe to describe specifically what the legislature had determined might be a good course of action in lieu of having the MnDOT actually construct LRT in the future. Mr. Greenfield.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, the relevant statute that Chair Dibble is referring to is Minnesota Statutes 473-3999. In Chapter 127, the large bill that was passed at the end of session last year, this section was substantially amended to add specific staff and project assistance for review and oversight of light rail projects, of which the Metropolitan Council is designated as the responsible authority. In subdivision 2, this kind of specifies the extent of the staff and project assistance that is required. Under existing law before 2024, the assistance that was required, notwithstanding any potential cooperative agreement, was only staff assistance provided to the Department of Transportation. This change that was enacted in 2024 required more directed assistance for specific projects. And to the extent that that type of assistance is specified, that's provided kind of in the second part in Clause 2 of Subdivision 2, where the Department of Transportation's project assistance is specific to the delivery method selection for the design, planning, acquisition, construction, and equipping of light rail transit projects, risk assessment and cost analysis in the planning of light rail projects, which includes a critical path schedule for the planning and design phases of a project that's jointly developed by both the Council and the Commissioner of Transportation. Peer reviews or value engineering reviews at various milestones established in the critical path schedule that's established in the item above, and Council participation in cost estimate reviews by third-party independent cost estimators in conformance with FTA regulations and guidance. The additional elements of project and staff cooperation include contractor and subcontractor schedule analysis. So this was already part of the SAFT assistance that was provided by MnDOT, but in 2024, additional duties were added on to that clause to provide for more MnDOT development and review of proposals and bids prior to the advertisement and solicitation of bids, a review of bids submitted to the prior award of bids, so essentially more participation in the prior awarding bid process and the solicitation process. And then MnDOT also was to provide draft review of contractual language, a review of change orders for major cost items exceeding $500,000 and or schedule delays of 30 calendar days or greater, and participation in a dispute resolution process that may exist between the council and any contractor in the construction of a light rail project or any other phase of a light rail project. The additional changes in 2024 to the budget analysis and to handle potential cost overruns include recommendations to address potential discrepancies, funding sources, contingency funding sources, and the management of state or county financial resources, recommendations on appropriate contractual enforcement mechanisms for an agreement between the council and any contractor for a light rail project, and the development of future cost estimates and communication of projected cost increase for a light rail transit project. So more prospective budget planning analysis and the development of more of a forward-looking method of staff assistance. So those are the 5 areas of expertise that the legislature enacted in 2024 to require the Department of Transportation provide to the council. Additional requirements in Subdivision 2 specify that the staff that is providing assistance from MnDOT must report to the Commissioner of MnDOT, and it must include at least 1 licensed professional engineer. And then in paragraph D of Subdivision 2 and paragraph E, this builds in the kind of the purpose for the committee hearing today, which is the legislative notification requirements. Paragraph D requires that if MnDOT provides staff and project assistance, the commissioner is required to detail those recommendations to the Transportation Committee within 30 days of submitting its recommendations to the Metropolitan Council. And then paragraph E provides kind of the response mechanism for those recommendations, where the council is obligated to give strong consideration to utilizing input or recommendations developed by the commissioner of MnDOT. And if the council decides against utilizing input or recommendations from the department, the council must first reconcile significant deviations and also notify the Legislative Transportation Committee within 30 business days that provides written notice and documentation of the decision regarding the circumstances of that decision. So that hasn't arisen yet, but that requirement in paragraph E is operative in the sense that if the council decides to deviate from the recommendations of the council, they must notify the legislature. And then the other additional change enacted in 2024 is the new Subdivision 3 regarding project costs. These 2 sentences kind of have different ambits. The first sentence says, it essentially says that the costs of this project assistance must be paid for by the council out of the project budget, and that the council must only use direct appropriations in law or federal sources to pay for its portion of light rail transit capital construction costs. So those were the changes that were enacted in 2024 and underline the overall substance and depth of the project and staff assistance required of Metropolitan Council if they are the designated authority for an LRT project. And the final note, sorry, Senator, is the effective date. These requirements apply prospectively to any future light rail extension projects, not the Green Line Southwest light rail extension project.
Yeah, horse is kind of out of the barn with the green lines. But thank you, Mr. Greenfield. And also just obviously, we're just at the very threshold of, blue line. There's still a lot more to be done, said, and written. So obviously, the totality of what we're asking and requiring MnDOT to do vis-a-vis the Met Council, has yet to be undertaken because we're still at the very kind of front end, if you will. So we're just going to hear about some of the initial elements around delivery method, selection of construction contracts. I mean, you can look at the cover letter yourself from the Department of Transportation. These are the items related to the identification of the appropriate delivery method, selection of its construction contracts, et cetera. And much of the balance of what Mr. Greenfield described is yet to happen. And, I don't think it's 100% even determined, especially in light of the changes in DC, whether or not we're actually going to see a blue line or not, because the FTA is, going to be radically different. Mr. Duffy, I think, doesn't really want to be investing in any sorts of mobility improvements and transportation needs for folks who live in metropolitan areas, apparently. But so we'll see what happens. But with that, Senator Zinsky looked like you were getting ready to say something. Okay, with that, why don't the members, do we need anything at this point? Have any questions or comments? All right, well, why don't we wait to hear, or why don't we invite the Department of Transportation to the table? So please come forward, and then we'll ask them how they want to handle questions. All right, so welcome. Mr. Rudin, Mr. Kozabud, is that right? Correct. All right, please introduce yourself for the record, proceed with your testimony, and then Mr. Rudin, if you could just help us, would you like to provide your comments and then respond to questions, or would you like us to interrupt you and ask questions along the way?
Mr. Chair, Eric Rudin, MnDOT Government Affairs, and I think we're open to either, whichever the committee prefers. So we were going to just do a quick overview of alternative contracting methods that the department uses, and then kind of walk through the report, and that was our plan.
Great. So why don't we try to get the totality of your report, and then we'll have questions. So scribble them down if you have questions along the way. Unless you have a burning question, then feel free to get my attention and we'll interrupt. Thanks. All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start and then turn it over to Mr. Kozabud. But as you and Mr. Greenfield have ably described already, these new requirements were enacted last year in an attempt to sort of leverage the department's expertise on large civil contracts, how we manage projects, how we deliver our program, and the hope, of course, is to provide greater accountability and oversight as the Met Council is also undertaking large, complicated transportation projects. So MnDOT's Office of Construction and Innovative Contracting, where Mr. Kozabud works, has attempted to provide some of their expertise to the Blue Line Extension project as they are deliberating the method of how to contract for this project. And our interpretation of this is that, we are in an advisory role, and we will keep you informed of our recommendations to the Met Council. And, hopefully through that process, we can provide some expertise to increase that accountability and project management within the Met Council. So before we start, Mr. Chair, we thought it might just be helpful to talk briefly about some alternative contracting methods, just so we sort of are all on the same page with terminology. And if you have the report, this is actually on the last page of the report. So we have what we refer to as our traditional design, bid, build method of contracting. That's how we deliver most of our projects at MnDOT. So we fully design a project, we go out to bid. The lowest responsible bidder is then awarded the project. So that's how we deliver most things, but there are some variations on that. Best value contracting allows us to consider other factors in addition to price. And so while price is still a very important factor, it is not the only factor that we're evaluating as we look at bids and award construction contracts. Design build, which I'm sure you've heard of, is a process that brings designers and contractors into the process earlier than that traditional design bid build. And so we define some standards and general specifications, but then we have a more flexible process working with the design builder to maximize value on various portions of the project, and usually allows us to begin construction earlier because a project doesn't have to be fully designed before you can actually start getting out in the field and doing some work. Then we also have what's known as construction manager general contractor, or CMGC. This is somewhat similar to construction manager at risk, and so you might hear that term as well as we go through the conversation today. But this is an innovative delivery method allowing us to hire a construction contractor early in the design phase to serve as a construction manager for us as the owner. And then it allows us to get input on things like constructability, risk, cost, schedule, things that contractors have expertise in that we can then incorporate into the project. And so this delivery method really is an integrated approach to planning, designing, and constructing a project. And we have found that it is very well suited for large, complex projects with significant risk. And so the legislature authorized MnDOT to use this authority on 10 projects initially, and those of you who have been around might remember we were here a couple years ago to get that increased, and so now we are able to do up to 20 CMGC projects, at which time we'll have to come back to the legislature for additional authority. And so with that, Mr. Chair, just want to reiterate what I think Mr. Greenfield covered too, which is this report is really focused on the construction delivery method selection. There are lots of other responsibilities that we have that really probably won't kick in until the project is actually under construction. For example, things like reviewing change orders, for example, that would be something we would do as the project is being built. But if it's all right, I can turn it over now to Mr. Kozabud to sort of talk about how MnDOT uses these alternative contracting methods for large, complicated road and bridge projects. Okay.
Thank you. Questions, members? Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if this is the appropriate place for the question, but as a new member on this committee, I have two questions about what was just revealed. If this is not the time, you can answer them later. But I wondered on a best value, if there's a list of allowable other considerations, or if that's just a blanket whatever. I'm assuming there's some requirements there. And then the second question has to do with the construction manager general contractor provision, and I'm just curious why there was a limit, but now it's greater. And also, I think to the end of that question is, what have the results shown from that? Is that a better method, and why is it a better method? I'm assuming it is, or we would not have doubled the amount of projects allowed, but what are the risks? And Mr. Chair, I don't know if you have time for those today, but at some point, those are things I'd like to know.
I think we can take a stab at them now before we hear from Mr. Kozabud. I just needed to look at the name. Yeah, why don't, just because we're doing a little primer first before then we hear the report, and particularly the best value question, because I think that's the direction that they're moving. Do you want to take a stab at it, either of you, in responding to Senator Nelson?
Sure, Mr. Chair and Senator Nelson, I'll maybe start with the second question first, and then Mr. Kozabud can take the first question. But the department originally proposed eliminating the cap on construction manager general contractor, but I think the contracting community wasn't quite ready to to jump all in at the point we were making that request, and so that was why we ended up with the additional 10 projects, and then we will have to actually issue another report to the legislature and seek some additional authority, you know, whether that's just eliminating the cap or doing an increased number of projects. Design build, for example, there's not a numerical cap on the total number of projects, but there is an annual cap. So I can't remember, I think it's no more than 10% of our construction program can be design build. And so, you know, maybe there could be some other mechanism for limiting the number of CMGC projects, but still allowing us to use it where it's appropriate. I think we have found it to be very valuable, again, on those large, complicated projects where there is a significant amount of risk, because bringing that construction manager in early helps us to manage those risks, to identify and then manage those risks as we move towards building a construction project. So we have found it to be very valuable. Perhaps I'll turn it over to Mr. Kozabud for the first question.
Kevin Kozabud, MnDOT, Office of Construction and Innovative Contracting. So thank you, Chair and Committee, for having us. As far as the best value, when we do those contracts, we try to be and need to be very transparent. So what we are looking for, the areas that we're looking to expand are described in our contract, and even what weight they'll be given towards the final contract, so that those bidding on it will understand, and then they have to decide how they think they're going to meet those goals of our contract, because they aren't necessarily something that's an item that they would bid on, but it may be duties that they would perform inside of that contract. So it's usually things that are above and beyond our bare minimums, and how they're going to resolve things and take care of things.
So, Senator Nelson, is that specific enough for you? I mean,
There's one.
I could take a stab at something I think a specific kind of a thing that would be considered a best value addition that would cause a contract to be nominally more expensive but deliver greater value to MnDOT, to the community. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I recall this. In the instance, for example, when there's limited ability to access a given community. A low bid, you know, DBB low bid, might be that proposal which shuts the trunk highway down entirely. You get it done pretty fast, and then you open it back up. Dig it up, reconstruct it, open it back up, bada boom, bada bing, you're done, and you spent as little money as possible. A little more expensive to stage the construction in a way that allows for ongoing access to that town, because it takes more time and a lot more logistics to do the construction in a way that, but you can imagine, so there's more expensive, but there's more value, maybe external to MnDOT, external to the project, but to the surrounding community, because they're not cut off for 6 months. Is that a way of thinking about best value?
I think that's a very common component of our projects, is the schedule or the durations and the impacts we have on our traveling public and the owners. So a good example is if maybe we'll tell them they can close the freeway down for 100 days, part of the best value, they may say we're going to only take 80. Or we may allow a ramp closure for a period of time, and they may say we don't need that much, we're going to do it quicker. Those types of things, and those provide a value to both the users and to the department. So those are really good examples of how we would see best value utilized in our project. But we would tell them the contract time is very important to us and encourage them to look at those areas. So.
All right, let Senator Nelson follow up.
Thank you, and thank you for that clarification too. Very concrete example. I remember when the 52 rebuild, that was quite significant, and I think actually they ran 24/7, if I'm not mistaken. But my question was, then on the construction manager, general contractor piece, what is the risk on that? So I understand why there might be a limitation on the best value because of the additional cost, but what's the risk to the state or the state taxpayers or safety, whatever? What is the risk on the construction manager, general contractor process, and so why is it limited?
Can we take it, Eric? Yep. So
Mr. Kozubud.
the biggest risk we have is when we negotiate those contracts to start with, they're what we call a professional technical type contract, where we're agreeing on their expertise to help us build our designs and get those ready to go. And then they are offered, as we do that, we have price review points as we go through that process. But ultimately, when we get to the end, they've earned the right to give us a sole bid on the project. And with that, it's not necessarily a competitive bid. We say it'll be a fair and reasonable bid, and we have basically 2 or 3 components to help us determine if that's what we've been given or submitted to. So it's a very rigorous process to get to that, but it ultimately comes down to that there's not a bidding competition among other contractors for that work. If we deem that they are too expensive for us, then it goes back, and it could go back to a public bid opening with that project. So.
Thank you.
So could I ask a follow-up question, though? Because risk always triggers this thought in my mind. So they've consulted along the way, so then they earn that right for the sole bid. It has to be. But on an ongoing basis, then, as the construction project is being undertaken, does MnDOT hold them to? Does MnDOT divest itself of substantial risk then, in that instance, on cost, and delay? Is that the trade-off that MnDOT itself is not going to be absorbing and paying for cost overruns and schedule delays as a matter of?
I think our CMG contracts work very much similar to our traditional ones once we get to that point. And if there's a change of scope, if there's a change of conditions, those contractors are entitled to that just like we would in any other contract. The difference is that they have a lot more knowledge about the project. Typically, our jobs are advertised for 3, maybe 4 weeks at a time. In this particular instance, a lot of these contractors have been with us for 1 or 2 years as we're going through our processes. So they have a much better understanding, and our overruns are usually significantly less on those types of projects because they've been there to help us weed through the problems, and even at sometimes have contingencies. If this happens, we're going to address it right away and we'll move on. So we typically have lower overruns on those jobs because we've had involvement with our contractors through the life of the project.
Great, thank you. Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question has to do with, well, I have a couple quick ones here, and then I'm sure more later. But my question is, depending on how Met Council determines to manage the project. So I know you've made your recommendations, and you've gone through the different contracting methods. That's very good, and I understand that. Will MnDOT also make any recommendations as to how the project is bid? Do all of these require lump sum? Do they allow for unit price? How will the project actually be, or how will the contract quantities actually be contracted for? And for those on the committee that might not remember this, Southwest was bid as a lump sum project, whereas most projects, unless Mr. Kozma, you can correct me if I'm wrong, most MnDOT projects are bid unit price. So I'm wondering if there's thought related to that, or if that will be a Met Council decision. Mr. Chair.
Mr. Rudin or Mr. Kozubud, and
Yeah,
maybe lump sum unit price, you can help us understand what.
Yeah, so our design builds are lump sum when we go to that project or to that specific procurement type. Our CMGCs are not. They're more of a traditional as like the rest of our projects. So a little bit of it goes with the procurement method. A little bit of what Met Council's, what authority they have and the different procurement methods that they have to select. And as I understand, they're limited in some of the things that they can do. So they like some of the things that our procurements offer, but some of those aren't open to them as I understand it right now.
Follow up?
Yes, but help us understand unit price and lump sum.
Well, I can do that, or you can do that, but my follow-up is, are we able contractually, or is it possible to bid or to execute a design-build project with unit prices?
You can do breakdowns.
And I'll explain what that is in a
sorry.
minute. Oh, do you want me to explain it? Oh, sorry.
Now I'm okay. Who's got? I'm confused now.
I can explain.
Okay, why don't you explain what you want to explain, then we'll go to Mr. Kozubud.
right, my apologies,
All right.
Mr. Chair. So when a MnDOT, when any government project is bid unit price, it means that the contractor is given an estimated quantity for each construction item. Every item is described in a way that leads to a specification that includes how the material is sourced, what it's comprised of, how it's built, and how it's paid for. So on a unit price project, if we were, let's say, getting a price to build a roadway that had 3 intersections, every single lineal foot of curb and gutter, every ton of blacktop, every square yard of concrete is quantified, and then every single contractor gives a unit price for every single item, and then they're added up. Then in the field, as the contractor builds that project, who's ever the low bidder, or, well, presumably low bidder, then there's measurement in the field. So if an intersection gets changed or taken out, that work doesn't get accomplished or measured or paid for. So it's very easy to keep track of additions, subtractions, changes, et cetera. And no, I'm not going to go into change orders, so you can all rest. But that is a very common way to bid projects. Even we go down to like the lineal foot of striping, like it's very specific. With a lump sum, there's still a list of quantities and there's still a breakdown, but the contractor submits a bid to do the whole thing. And the challenge with that is and this is my engineer perspective, this is maybe not fact and subject to response by our speakers, but the challenge with that is if an intersection is, for example, removed from the project, there has to be this reduction in the lump sum, because the lump sum bid included 3 intersections. If one of the intersections is removed, we still have a contract for the lump sum. And again, in my professional opinion, that was one area where some of the challenges around the light rail, the Southwest LRT budget came in that we had a lump sum contract, which again, may be the way that we have to do it. And I, of course, am interested in your answer, but it also requires a huge amount of tracking, especially on a $2 billion project. So this is my very basic description, and again, I welcome your feedback, and if I got any of that wrong, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. Mr. Kozubud.
Yep, apologize for earlier. That's kind of a tough question to really answer. We do some contracts that are lump sum, not very many. Our design builds typically are. They can have a breakdown, and they give us a breakdown as when they return their bids to us of different portions. But it may be, bridge A, B, C, D, some larger ones, but there's typically ones there. The vast majority of our jobs are done by a line item type bidding of quantities, and CMGC is the same way as that. So I guess there's both. There's pros and cons, to using both. It kind of depends on where the responsibility lies in design build. Contractor has both the responsibility for the design and the construction of the project, therefore he has a lot more of the risks. We're not asking him to give us quantities. We don't really care what the quantities are. They have to build the project that they've been contracted to do, so.
So my initial,
Senator Johnson, sure.
my question then is, would it be, will MnDOT, maybe an easier question to answer is, will MnDOT be making a recommendation within their recommendations for how the contract is procured, whether it be bid as lump sum? It sounds like the two go together. Design build with lump sum, CMGC with unit prices, best value. Best value, I understand you can do unit price, correct?
Mr. Kozubud.
That is correct.
Thank you. That's
All right. All right, anything further at this point? All right, Mr. Kozubud.
All right. So I was asked just to give you a little bit of a history and background of how the department uses some of these procurement methods. So I'll back up, and Eric stole some of my thunder earlier, but that's all right. MnDOT began in '96. We did 3 projects on a low bid process for design build. And that was, again, to make our contractors feel comfortable and let us feel comfortable with the process. In 2001, the legislature gave us approval to use the procurement method. Since then, since 2001, we've did a little over 50 projects. We have 2 currently under construction that you might be aware of, 494 down on South Metro, and we're also doing a statewide PED bridge project. And then we have several more planned for next year. There's another phase of 494. Blatnick Bridge is going to be design build, and some other ones. So some of the advantages as we see of that is, again, we can advance the design and construction quicker. So sometimes it's about funding. A lot of our jobs comes with funding requirements that money must be spent by a certain date. Design builds allows us to do that earlier in our process without having all of our documents completed and to go. A good example of that is the emergency funding for 35W. That was the procurement method we picked for that when it was ultimately decided that we needed to get that bridge open as quickly as possible. Design build also offers us the teams, so you got a contractor and a designer pooled together and to come up with innovative techniques, timing, things about the projects. And we use those as examples of a very complicated job. The first time we picked up a bridge and moved it, similar to how you'd move a house, we used a design build method to try to help do that. Contractor's responsible for it, but yet he had to demonstrate how to do it. Another one is design competition. When we use design build, there are multiple bidders, and you end up with what we call a design competition a lot of times, how they think it's going to be best, how they can do it most economical. So it serves us in that way. The other one that we find very valuable with it is when we use in best value, sometimes we've done fixed price variable scope. So we'll tell them we have a budget, and they just tell us how much they can build. A good example is we do unbonded overlays, which are a concrete overlay of a bituminous roadway or an old concrete roadway, and we say we got X number of dollars, how many miles can you build us? So that we can control our budgets but get the maximum for our taxpayers. We also do things called ATCs, which are alternate technical concepts. So when we put our packages together, they may see a better way to do it or something different that maybe isn't in our mainstream construction. They're allowed to ask permission to do these things that they say will reduce cost or bring better quality with our projects. One of the other advantages is MOT, or maintenance of traffic, and you guys kind of talked about that already. When the contractor knows his means and methods and how long things are going to take, he can design a traffic control or how he's going to handle traffic to build that. A couple of the disadvantages that we see is there is a lot more risk on our design builder, the contractor and designer. And the industry is not afraid to tell us that. There are times when we're pushing them too far and where they feel comfortable. So it is one of the reasons we limit. If we can shed that risk to them in an appropriate manner, then we feel comfortable. If we can't, then we won't use that procurement method. And we also do lose some level of design and control. I always say that we build a box that they have to build in, but our contractors are able to go to the edges of these boxes at times, and that may not make us feel comfortable. So it's kind of how we use our projects and how we use that procurement method. A quick primer on CMGC. This allows us to hire the contractor earlier. We retain control of the design, and their role is to help us figure out the constructability, the risks, the costs that are going along with this during the design phase. The example I kind of give is if we're getting ready to put pavement on our projects, he may give us an estimate for bituminous or concrete and tell us which one is going to be more cost effective up front. We'll look at the design life of that and help make a decision. So something that they can do. We talked a little bit that we received this authority in 2012 to use CMGC. Eric talked that we were given authority for 10, and then we came back and asked for another 10, and that's how it ended up, I guess. But the goal there was to not run out of projects so that we didn't lose the procurement opportunity to do that. To date, we've only used 8. So again, we're using this very sparingly. If you look from 2012 to today, in 12 or 13 years, however you want to look at it, we've used it for 8 projects. So again, it's a tool that we use, but it's not something we use that frequently. Some of the benefits that we see on that are innovation with our contractor during the design. It does have budget and cost implications that can help us control costs a lot better. We're doing a 30, 60, and 90 review times on our cost for those. We retain control of the design. We get to make the final decisions on that, not the designer. We can reduce our risks. We're talking about risks during the projects. I talked a little bit about contingency for things. We're typically knowing if this happens, this is what we're going to do. We're doing that ahead of time. Better constructability can reduce time. Contractors there to help us do that. Overlap design and construction. And then on time, and like I talked already, our budget certainty, I think we're averaging 1.5% contract overruns on CMGC projects, which we consider pretty good. Our other ones are probably in the 4 to 5% range, so it's markedly different. Some of the challenges, we talked already that MnDOT and the contractor must meet a fair and reasonable price. We must come to an understanding of that. We have some mechanisms to help us get there. The other one has already been briefly touched too. It's still relatively new. We do not have a lot of our current contractors and owners that have been exposed to it, so they feel a little bit reluctant at times, and they still have a limited understanding, so we're still proceeding quite slow with it. The last procurement method that's just a little bit different than I thought I would talk about is when we incorporate best value into our low bid projects, and we do that sporadically. The idea there is to consider other factors that we've talked about in the selection process. They could be qualifications, they could be schedule, could be the quality, could be performance-based criteria that we use in the selection and evaluation. We currently have the authority to do best value, and we utilize it in our design bid builds and our bid build projects. We attained this authority back in 2007. Some examples where it has been used in the past was the St. Croix Bridge that we built over near Stillwater. Again, we had a very unique project, unique structures, unique environmental conditions going on there, so we did some stuff with that. On 35W and Lake Street, we did some stuff with civil rights and workforce to try to encourage employment. The most recent one we did was Stone Arch Bridge. With some of the unique characteristics going on in that project, we felt that we needed a certain type of contractor with qualifications. The other one we do is we do a lot of pre-qualification, which is a component of best value on our historic properties. In the past, we had had trouble with unqualified contractors building those for us. And once the historic value is destroyed or impaired, it's tough to regain that. So we continue to use that. So when is it useful? On these, we talk about unique challenges or unique projects going there. Price is always a factor when we're utilizing that. We're typically still using low bid when we're doing that, but it's a selection factor. Some of the benefits is the bidders can identify risks and mitigation strategies that will help us with our project. We talked about useful for pre-qualifications of their workforce or their leadership. We at times are asking what their contract team is going to look like, who it's going to be, their experience. Have they demonstrated that they're able to do these types of projects for us? Some of the drawbacks that people perceive that why don't you do this all the time is that it still doesn't guarantee the success of a project. There's certain things that we can control and others we can't. It shouldn't restrict competition. It doesn't resolve existing or previous poor administration problems that cause a lot of problems on our projects. This doesn't help that. Takes longer in our procurement system. We go from a typical 3-week to an 8-week procurement. Additional agency effort to prepare documents, cost to the industry to prepare documents. Some of them don't want to go through that extra effort. They'll just stay in the low bid environment and don't want to go through the hoops. And it may increase the project cost depending on what requirements we ask them to do. If you ask for a more experienced team or certain ways to handle situations, it can drive costs up, and budgets are always a concern of ours. So that's some of the ways we've been using these procurement methods outside our traditional low bid process.
Thank you. So, Mr. Radin.
Mr. Chair, unless there are questions on that, I can kind of walk through a couple of the recommendations in the report, if that's
Great.
appropriate.
Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the testimony, Mr. Cosbud. So some of the discussion of those people that can perform to that level. So in the low bid type process, are we losing local contractors that just can't do all the detail that the bigger contractors can? Again, my concern is it's so complicated to go through that process that we're losing the smaller contractors across our state, and then hence you get 2 or 3 contractors that can handle those bids, but it's not as competitive. So can you discuss a little bit the balance between getting it so complex to those? I know they're larger projects, but Are we eliminating the local small contractors that could be providing a better service or a more cost-efficient service by going this process, or which process is the best to help the local contractors, and may it be in wherever it is in Minnesota? You get my understanding of the smaller areas versus the great big contractors. So what's the best method to make sure that our small contractors can still perform without having to meet so many requirements that it puts them out of the process?
Mr. Coswood.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I don't think these procurement methods are prohibiting people from participating in our contracts. A lot of our contractors don't want to be the primes. So I think a lot of the ones you're talking about are some of our lower, our second tier, our subs. And, you know, they're still participating at a very high level and a high volume on these types of projects. There are certain contractors now that like these types of procurements. It offers them the ability to do work over and above, and they've decided that that's where their company likes to work. And that's not only in the state, but it can be companies that come from outside of our state at times too. But we're still very cognizant. I think the labor market and stuff that's going on, there's going to be plenty of room for all of the contractors that want to participate. We are starting to see some new ones that dabble in these areas. For example, for design build, we started with some of our larger projects that kind of command the attention of our bigger primes. We've since drifted down. I think the smallest design build project we did was $500,000. And again, that allows contractors that aren't typically maybe wanting to bid on these. The big ones probably aren't interested in a contract that small. So then we're getting different participation. So we don't feel it's limiting it, if that's what you're asking.
Senator Jasinski.
And then just to follow up, because I remember the Highway 14 process between Owatonna and Rochester was a design build that went, from what I understand, fairly well, and it went under budget. So I just think that's a way that, you know, we're helping. Again, I think the discussion here today is protecting taxpayer money and how we're spending it to make sure we're spending it wisely. So I think we needed to continue on to do whatever we can do to do that. I think obviously that's what we're elected for, is to make sure we're good persons to oversee the taxpayer money. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Rudin.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So back to the report, which I know you have, so I won't walk through it line by line, but just to say there were a series of meetings between MnDOT staff and the Met Council staff after this new legislation was enacted last year, as we were developing this first report. And those discussions did, of course, focus primarily on these different contracting methods. So I think, you know, the Met Council seemed like they were receptive to our input on, you know, thinking about some of these things, as well as some of the limitations on the various contracting methods as they're moving forward. So the specific recommendations that you can see, we had 3 of them. The first, that we believe the council should develop best value criteria that are structured to increase bidder participation and solicit constructability feedback. So continuing to work on that best value approach, and you know, encouraging the council to really come up with specific plans for using that best value delivery method, and making sure that they're talking to contractors to you know, get them interested in bidding on the project and get their feedback on constructability. Secondly, recommend that the council increase its staffing capacity and expertise in these roles that are related to contract delivery. So I think this is a key point. Our experience has been, you know, we can have the legislature give us statutory authority to use these different contracting methods, but then we really need to develop in-house expertise for people who know how to use those tools. And so I think this is one area where we might see a potential gap with the Met Council currently, that they should, you know, really bring that expertise in-house. Of course, you know, we rely on consultants and things as well, but you need to have that sort of core knowledge that you have in-house to be able to effectively use these tools. So if you have staffing gaps, that can certainly impact your ability to execute any procurement strategy and hinder your achievement of goals. And then finally, the third recommendation is that we recommend the council seek additional alternative delivery authority for horizontal construction. And so, again, methods that allow that early contractor input for large-scale civil contracts, you know, getting that early and direct input into constructability, value engineering, and helping you to identify potential risks. So those were our recommendations. I know you're going to hear from them at council, but I'll just maybe close by saying that we're certainly committed to continuing to fulfill the requirements of this legislation and providing input where we can be helpful to the council as they move forward. I do want to note that we have just recently in the last couple months hired Joe Corzelius, who is here today. He's a former MnDOT employee who went to the private sector, and now we've encouraged him to come back and help us with this process. So he'll really be our point person going forward. He is a registered engineer. I know he and Senator Johnson Stewart have a long professional history together, and so we're excited to have Joe on board. He will probably be the point person in developing future reports to the legislature as well. You know, we committed to at least by August, but we've had some conversation about, you know, maybe doing a report prior to August that would really focus on schedule, because I think that's where we feel we can be most helpful to the council right now is as they're developing the schedule for Blue Line extension. And then I'll just point out too that we do have other MnDOT staff within our metro district who are already sort of embedded in the Blue Line extension project, and that is common on these large projects. So the Green Line had a similar arrangement where we have several people who are working on that project on a day-to-day basis. They're MnDOT employees, but they're being paid for out of the project budget. And, you know, especially where we are interacting with that project. So, you know, if it's crossing a freeway, for example, or if there's a bridge where we can, you know, provide our input as a bridge is being designed. Right-of-way acquisition is another area where we have used our staff to help advance some of these transit projects. So that's something we will continue to do. In addition to having Joe here, we'll have our staff continue to provide that input on these large projects as they move forward.
Great. Thank you. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Rudin, for that comment again. I remember this a few years ago. We talked about this, or maybe it was last year. And again, my concern, I think somebody has to oversee this because obviously what Met Council's done and the overruns that we've seen are concerning. I think it was originally intended at 2011 to be a $1.25 billion project. It was supposed to be done in 2018. Now it's a $2.74 billion project, and it's not going to be done until 2027. My concern is, though, MnDOT, the way I think is we want, and you brought up staffing gaps and things like that. So my concern is we're going to spend so much time on this, we're not actually using MnDOT to do roads and bridges and the things we think we're using them. And I know we talked about Met Council paying for these things and that, but my concern is, you know, we used to call them leakages. I got to get a new word, but misused funds or just some way how that's allocated. And I know how things can be allocated when you're working on one thing or you're working on two things and how you allocate your time to one thing versus the other. But again, my concern is we're taking the resources away from MnDOT to work on the things that we think they should work on, roads and bridges and those things. And now we're spending that time and having staffing gaps to be able to oversee projects for the Met Council. So I'm going to continue to work to make sure we're not having those gaps that's taking away from what our intent is on roads and bridges and doing what MnDOT should be doing. So that's my only concern. I'll continue to bring that up. I think we've had some discussion of that with the department before, just to make sure that we're not cutting ourselves short on what MnDOT should really be focused on. Thank you.
Oh, I agree with you, except that it is the Department of Transportation, not the Department of Highways. It hasn't been the Department of Highways since 1976. But, and you and I have had this discussion, my goal is not to take away from the totality of the Department of Transportation's mission. And really what I had envisioned when I proposed that MnDOT take over construction of LRT is the project office and everything that's true about how they do construction today remains the same. The shingle out in front is changed from, you know, Met Council to MnDOT, and then of course the ownership and the operation, ongoing construction, ongoing capital maintenance would revert to Metro Transit. Other people had a different view, whatever. So, Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kozabed, my question is for Mr. Kozabed. Has Joe Korzelius, will he be working on this full-time, or is in fact he going to be sharing his time with other projects to increase an opportunity for leakage, which I love that word. That's my question. Is Joe going to work full-time on light rail?
Looks like Mr. Rudin is going to respond.
Mr. Chair, Senator Johnson Stewart, I would say he will primarily be working on light rail, but there are other, Blotnick Bridge is a good example where we might want to tap into his expertise to do, to provide some input on other MnDOT projects as well, especially, kind of depending on what's happening on this project. Maybe, maybe there isn't a need for him to be 100% full-time just on this project for a period of a week or something, where he could be pulled into some other discussions on other large complex projects. So he will primarily be working on this effort, but there is certainly a possibility he'll be involved in some other conversations as well.
I have a follow-up.
Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you. So maybe just a brief overview of how MnDOT will staff this. I mean, I 100%, I have full faith in MnDOT to manage large construction projects like this. You've done it over and over again. You have the expertise, you have the knowledge, you have the staff, you have people in place, super great, all those things. I don't have the same I don't have the same knowledge of similar expertise at Met Council. So how, like, Mr. Kozabed, it's hard for me not to call you Kevin, sorry, but Mr. Kozabed, will you continue to have input? Will it just be Mr. Korzelius? Will there be a team? What is MnDOT's continued involvement? Will it just be one oversight person? I realize it might be early, but I just want to have some understanding of what it means to review, what it means to give professional feedback, et cetera. It seems like work for more than one person. That's my question.
All right, Mr. Rudy.
Mr. Chair, Senator Johnson Stewart, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And so Kevin, Mr. Kozabud's office is a good example, the Office of Construction and Innovative Contracting. Even before Mr. Korzelius joined us on staff, there were several people within that office that were providing input into these recommendations, as well as the staff then within our Metro district, who are really the ones who are embedded sort of on a day-to-day basis in these large transit projects. Mm-hmm. And so both of those things will continue as well. And so I guess I would envision Joe's position as being sort of the lead, the point person, but then as we need expertise from the Office of Construction or whatever office within the department that we're saying, oh, you know what, they could sort of use some input on this particular thing. Let's go talk to Office of Land Management and have them come to a few meetings and give their input. So we will definitely continue that as well.
Just as a follow-up, I want to affirm that. Yeah, I think that's great. I would, again, I'm really comfortable with MnDOT's OCIC. I think you guys do great work. You have a record of managing very complex, gargantuan projects in a way that's very competent and gets good results. So I would very much encourage that, and I think that would at least help me feel confident that we have some additional oversights on this new project going forward. So if I can be helpful in explaining that or in helping that be something that happens, I very much be willing to do that. Mr. Chair, that's the end of my question.
Thank you. All right, anything further, members from MnDOT? All right, thank you very much. We'll invite the Met Council forward. We have Jody Jacoby, Ryan O'Connor, and Judge Shetnan.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair.
Welcome.
I'm Judd Shetnan. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the Met Council. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And just to start things off, I know it's been mentioned to a few of you, but our General Manager for Capital Projects is not able to be here today. And so we have Ms. Jacoby, who's our Procurement Director at the Council, available to speak to some of the recommendations. Since so many of them really deal with our procurement process. I'd also like to add that, as what Mr. Rudin mentioned, is that we have a strong relationship with MnDOT on these projects. We were happy to work with Chair Dibble, Chair Hornstein last year on this legislation, and we think that with its passage, that it makes our relationship stronger when it comes to these types of projects. So I want to thank you for that. And lastly, as you'll see in the council's response, is that we agree and support all the recommendations and look forward to continuing to work on this. I think a lot of the comments that have been made already are duly noted, and we are just lifting up the Blue Line Extension project right now, and so we look forward to incorporating these and feedback from the legislature on that as well. But Mr. Chair, my understanding is that you were looking for our response related to the report. So I'm going to ask Ms. Jacoby to kind of speak to those. They're relatively brief, but we will do that. And then I know that Mr. O'Connor, our regional administrator, is here as well. If there are any questions more broadly about the project or how you'd like to proceed. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Jacoby, if that's okay.
Great, thanks. Any questions at this point, members? No. Welcome, Ms. Jacoby. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm Jody Jacoby. I'm the Chief Procurement Officer at the Metropolitan Council. And as Judd mentioned, we fully agree with the recommendations with MnDOT and have been in partnership with them with this project to not only look at the contracting methods, but the project delivery methods to have a better outcome for this. And so I'll just roll through some of the recommendations and then I can pause to answer any questions. We're currently working on some of the evaluation criteria and looking at the project differently. Definitely we'll have some pass-fail criteria like insurance and bonding. But our technical criteria we're working on in consultation with Hennepin County, with MnDOT and other industry experts, looking at what is going to be important to measure success and get the technical qualifications, look at the best project delivery methods, certainly consider costs, that's always a component, and then also some better outcomes at the end. And we're, again, in many meetings looking at not only the weight of that criteria, but what criteria should be included. So that's the first recommendation. The second is looking at some of the staffing gaps for implementing some of the strategies. Again, we agree with MnDOT, and we've made some changes internally already, not only with working with our Office of General Counsel, but hiring a consultant, Tronar, to help us develop some of the procurement templates. As you're aware, we have not used best value methodology before, but we're working on some of those contract templates. And we've also hired some national industry experts that have a lot of experience with this contract type, with federal funds and projects of this size and nature. And so we are absolutely in agreement with some different internal standards and process improvements. And then finally, seeking additional legislative authority to implement and consider some project delivery methods. As you're aware, we have approval to have CMAR for vertical projects, but not horizontal, and having more contract options and contract delivery methods will help us determine what the best contract type is.
Thank you. Sorry, if you could revisit that last point. So in terms of having authorization for entering into different contract/procurement types, did you say you're going to be coming forward, or you're needing to come forward to the legislature for some of that authorization?
Mr. Chair and members, yes, that is something that we are working on right now as far as how we will bring that to the legislature. So
Great.
it
Thank
is
you.
a little bit more complicated, but it's certainly one of the recommendations that was made. And in our conversations with our project office and with our Office of Procurement, we're getting a bit of a late start on that, but it is one of the recommendations that we think could have a lot of value for us.
And CMAR is contract manager at risk.
Yep.
And vertical construction is buildings, horizontal is transportation. All right.
Yes.
Just getting that out there for the public's benefit. And, you know, maybe some of us. All right. Questions, members, for Senator Johnson Stewart?
Before I ask questions, is there going to be more testimony, or is this the time where you want me to ask questions?
This is the time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my understanding from MnDOT's testimony is that Met Council will be, in fact, in charge and hiring management staff for the project. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Shetland.
Yep, Mr. Chair, Senator Johnson Stewart, that's correct.
And
Senator Johnson Stewart.
thank you. And that person will be an employee of Met Council, or that person will be a consultant?
Mr. Shetland.
Mr. Chair, Senator Johnson Stewart, that person will be an employee of the council.
Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you have a timeline for that, as well as what kind of qualifications you'll be looking for? Will you be relying on MnDOT's Mr. Corzelius, a licensed engineer, or will you be seeking somebody from Met Council to have that expertise and the experience? I saw in here that they have to have 10 years of management experience, and I think that's super great. Wondering, though, if you expect, you know, how you see the role of the Met Council manager versus the role of the MnDOT Oversight manager, and if you know, you have an idea of the qualifications beyond 10 years of experience. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Shetland.
Mr. Chair, Senator Johnson Stewart, we are just in the process of pulling that together right now. We have an assistant general manager for capital projects who oversees all of our projects. When you look at the Blue Line extension, that person will be an engineer with the experience that was required in the legislation that was passed.
Senator Johnson Stewart.
Without naming names, I'm wondering, when is the Gold Line project going to be done? And do you think you might already have some staff that could fill this role?
I think it depends on what you mean by done.
Oh, when do you
Because they
think?
just announced that they're going to they're going to extend it from St. Paul now all the way over to Minneapolis. But the Gold Line, as we understand it today, I think is actually we're going to have a ribbon cutting and a inaugural ride soon.
Yeah, and I guess I don't want to be demure here, and I'm happy to compliment somebody in person. The current manager for Gold Line is a former MnDOT employee, Steve Barrett. He's excellent. And I'm wondering if there's any thought that that project manager might be able to move over, since Mr. Barrett has managed trillions of dollars of successful MnDOT projects. Just wondering if there's any thought. That's the genesis of my project, of my question.
All right, so okay, we have the proverbial good word has been put in on behalf of someone. Mr. O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Senator Johnson Stewart. Ryan O'Connor, Regional Administrator at the Metropolitan Council. Just I think March 22nd, I'm playing this fast and loose without looking at anything, I believe is the opening official date of the Gold Line. And if it's not, it's right around that day. It's a Saturday. Okay. March 22nd is the opening date of the Gold Line. Phase 1, Phase 2, 2027. Looking forward to celebrating that. Thanks, Senator, for raising that. Staff from the Gold Line will be transitioning in different capacities throughout the organization. Some of them will find their way onto the Blue Line project specifically. Your point is well taken. As the organization moves from being a one every 10-year capital projects delivery organization to one developing 7 projects over the next 10 years, the ability for us to be moving staff into different roles and building both institutional knowledge as well as innovation along the way, both in partnerships with MnDOT and at the council itself, is vitally important to delivering projects on time and on budget.
Senator
Great.
Johnson-Stewart.
Nope, I just want to say that's super great, and I look forward to watching as Met Council builds up its capabilities around managing these large projects. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So my question is along these same lines, not necessarily as pertains to, the project manager qualifications, but, and we heard a little bit about it, but if we could have like maybe a little more detail on the second recommendation. How does MnDOT envision more generally really driving into the organization the capacity, the knowledge, the experience on staff in these kinds of procurement methods and construction management knowledge, et cetera, so that we have, continuing, of course, with the, the MnDOT consultative role that we have envisioned, which we think is a pretty smart idea, but also there's no substitute for having that expertise, which then gives rise to the, organizational, cultural experience that will be so crucial over time.
Mr. Chair, I'll start, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Jacoby to talk a little bit more on the specific sides of the procurement pieces. There's a number of different ways my head goes here, so if I get scattered or I miss something, please bring me back to where you'd like to go. I think we talked a little bit about experience and repetition over time, providing opportunities for horizontal movement within an organization. That's one important step. There's also the capacity building overall piece to the work. Met Council has been hiring Metro Transit specifically across an array of jobs that would include pieces within the project office itself, as well as about 6 months ago, I formalized the projects division as a formal division within Metro Transit moving forward as an area of work, as a capital projects division led by a deputy general manager who reports to the general manager. Alongside the structure, process matters as well. And so as the regional administrator, I get a weekly transit update on all projects on Fridays, in which we talk about what's going well and what's not on any project. And as we all know with these projects, every week something new happens somewhere. And there's opportunities to learn through those processes together with one another. We are also conducting a season end of 2024, season construction begin process of what did we learn and what does that entail as we move into a new year. And I want to highlight that even for smaller projects, which are still large and impactful to communities around arterial BRT or guideway BRT, or we're talking LRT, they all carry certain pieces that are similar in terms of how do you learn from the good while continuing to build new ways to work with community and set expectations accordingly. And I'll give one example on the E-line. We had challenges at times last summer in working with particular nodes and parts of understanding there. And without going into, there are contracting pieces there that we've learned through those processes as well. But as we go into this session or this season, we're better situated working with those communities on the front end, learning from 2024. So I think it's a bit of technical stuff where I'll turn it over to Ms. Jacoby to finish, but also that structure and process alongside each other as we go. And we look forward to continuing to talk about that so that we can be transparent in how we're trying to learn from where we've been.
Mr. Chair, committee members, just to add on to that, we definitely have been looking at structural changes as well, in addition to building the contract template for best value to be able to utilize a different method. Within procurement, we've added a unit specifically for construction. And that team works hand in hand with the project delivery team and is regularly meeting with MnDOT, with Hennepin County, who has also done a lot of work with best value, in addition to working with the industry to get feedback so we can bring forward a project that looks not only in contract template, but in reality, once it's finished, it looks and feels different. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, we've hired an industry expert that's also helping guide, train our staff, look at the process, look at the different parts that fit up to a different and better system with how we're managing the procurement process.
So I think, thank you, I appreciate that. As we're kind of wrapping up and winding down here, having the sophistication around the procurement process that then, of course, leads to developing the contracts is very, very important to make sure that the contracts are written in a way that works really well for the public's interests and are then, of course, managed. We manage through the contract, we manage the prime contractors in a way that, of course, affords them and allows them their rights, to the dynamics that Senator Johnson Stewart talked about earlier around, price change and circumstance change and change orders, et cetera, but not in a way that you don't have the contract back left, to turn back to rely on for, what are the expectations, who's taking on the risk, who prices the risk, who pays for the risk. And so we don't find ourselves in this circumstance, and I'll just be very honest, it feels like to me, and it was described to me, that the prime contractor got this sweet deal because the contract wasn't written very tightly on the green line, and then just kind of ran Met Council ragged, just ran circles around the Met Council, construed everything as gigantic hassle and change order and implication for critical path and et cetera, that's leaving out into the entire conversation around large chunks of the scope that were left out, knowing full well that they were going to have to be brought in later, and then they were brought in on a, without any sort of competitive process or even analysis, much less an environmental analysis. So I'm glad to hear that we're going to bring on board, because I'm glad that Mr. Corzelius is here and MnDOT, we've got all these mechanisms for MnDOT. There's going to be, but there's no substitute if we're going to keep the essential responsibility at the Met Council, which we're doing. Right here, it says, the Met Council must give strong consideration to utilizing the input or recommendations developed by MnDOT. And then if they decide against it, then they just need to tell people about it. So the buck still does stop with the Met Council. And of course, the expectation is very, very high. The Met Council has come pretty close to, completely losing the faith of the public that it serves. And so this is an opportunity to set a different stage here and turn the corner and do something better and differently. So, thank you. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and you actually hit a couple of the comments I was talking about. Again, I'm going to go back to the concern I have is MnDOT's working a lot on these projects and not having time for other ones. I understand your discussion as well on the other side, and I really do agree that have the discussion or appreciate the discussion on the procurement process and trying to make it better. And actually, since I've gotten here and since 2017, we've been talking about issues like this. A lot of times Met Council comes and says we want to clean things up and correct things, and it just doesn't seem like we get to that point. So I had a little bit of frustration there. I think we are the stewards of taxpayer money, and my concern, the overall discussion above and beyond maybe a bigger picture of the procurement, but obviously there was a study out on North Star commuter rail and things like that. My concern, again, I appreciate you and I having a great relationship with something we don't always agree on. I think that the money that's going to the rail, both commuter rail, light rail, our ridership is still down from pre-COVID numbers. It's not coming back. We're seeing a lot more ride share, things like that. And is our best bang for our buck in rail, light rail, or commuter rail. I don't think so. That's not what I'm seeing. So my concern is, again, where we're spending our money on these things, and, continue to look at that. So again, my concern is looking at what came out with North Star, what we're seeing in ridership. The levels aren't coming back. And my concern is we're putting a lot of money into things that really aren't giving us a return on investment. So my comments, but again, thank you. I know we don't always agree on these things, but I do appreciate the conversation with it. So thank you.
Well, we do, Senator Jasinski, agree that we need to have, a benefit for the cost. I think the analysis does support these investments. I think there's a more fulsome discussion about North Star. I think it was designed to fail, even, it was never successful because it was the bridge to nowhere. If we had actually done it right in the first place and built it to St. Cloud, it would have been successful, but that was a different time, different era, and, our ability to measure benefits was so constrained as to limit it to the Big Lake stop. But I think you have a bill that looks for, a cost-benefit analysis on transit. I don't think we should be afraid of that conversation, because I think we'll find, if we follow the evidence, we'll find plenty of benefit for the cost, so long as we also, apply the same standard to all modes. If I can turn my gaze to MnDOT for just a moment, I think we have numerous instances where MnDOT tends to overbuild things and try to solve transportation mobility problems that are maybe more expensive than the actual return that we get for that, and could solve transportation mobility issues either in different ways or with a whole lot less asphalt and concrete. So, I'm interested in having the conversation about cost benefit if we apply it across the transportation system. So we'll have more conversation. Thanks. Anything further, members? Senator Nelson, then Senator Johnson.
Thank you. Just something to add, again, that I'm not exactly sure that it fits here, but the conversation has led me to just mention something that I've noticed too in the ridership numbers being down, and also the fact that perhaps, there's Uber, people taking Ubers. And the reason I just bring that up, and then, there's people working remotely now that maybe weren't working remotely before. So the point of that is not that MnDOT has control over those things, but the point of that is people are, we are adjusting every day to the new world that we live in. And when it comes to transit, I guess this is where I see the great benefit in BRT, bus rapid transit, is that you can change the lines, you can change the routes to meet what is demanded today. And tomorrow it's going to be something different, and you can change the route for what tomorrow's needs are much easier. And that is one thing that I worry about with the rails. Rails are very, well, they're pretty stationary. I don't recall many rails being changed from one route to another. I'm sure maybe it's happened before, but the point with BRT is it's so much more flexible. So that's just kind of my push to try and think about as we look at that, not just the cost-benefit analysis, but also just how fast our world is moving and how fast life is changing and the newer things on the horizon. So I guess you could just put that up to my comments. In great support of BRT, but somewhat concerned about the long-term viability of rail.
Thank you. I will respond quickly. Like I said, the cost benefit is a mandatory part of the analysis, and if the cost relative to the benefit doesn't add up, that's a project that should not proceed. So I support that. We've had this discussion about, does rail really stack up to the cost versus the benefit? And, maybe we'll hear from Metro Transit at Council about what we are experiencing in ridership. Maybe we should, if you can get ready for that in just a minute. The thing to remember about rail, keep in mind, not a uniform, let's put rail everywhere kind of a person, but in those instances where it does make sense, it's not only about getting folks from one end to the other end. So that's one thing we have to remember. It's about all the points in between. And it provides service, to a lot of where people are going along that corridor. The other thing it does, because it is fixed, as you described, it sends a market signal to those who come in behind and do the land use piece around those nodes. And so it creates a lot of efficiency of access and mobility in that sense, housing, jobs, education, services, all kinds of opportunities that wouldn't, we're going to have 1 million people moving to the metropolitan area over the next 20 plus years. And they're going to have to live and they're going to have to work somewhere. And if we can influence that in a way that allows them to access what they need in their lives in a more efficient, more proximate way, rail is a great tool to do that. In terms of cost effectiveness, rail is expensive to build, but it's very, very cheap to operate. Very, very cheap to operate. And you can increase capacity only by throwing on an additional car, not hiring a bunch of additional operators. And it's very, very competitive on an ongoing cost-benefit analysis in terms of upkeep. Whereas you're replacing buses, and fixing bus shelters and stuff can become very expensive on a capital maintenance in terms of the amount of actual mobility as measured by people accessing where they need to go basis. If you compare apples to apples with either bus rapid transit and rail actually, you're ahead with rail. So those are some of the arguments for LRT. But we can have more conversation about that. Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All this talk about BRT is reminding me of the yards of black, hateful concrete that I tested along BRT, because that's the color of the concrete that was installed there. Only bringing that up to remind you that there is infrastructure with BRT as well as LRT. And your point is well made, Senator Dibble. One only needs to drive down Hiawatha Avenue, Washington Avenue, University Avenue, and now drive out Highway 7, where Southwest LRT is being built, to see the, I would feel comfortable saying, thousands of housing units that are being built, and are being built there because the developers can rely on the permanence of light rail. That actually wasn't what I was going to talk about. I just wanted to, at the risk of giving those who love to make fun of my reminding everybody that I'm an engineer, at that risk, I'm just going to say that a component of a successful public works project is having good oversight and good management, as well as having a good contractor. Mr. Korzelius brings that, Mr. Kozabud brings that, MnDOT brings that. We, of course, we have good contractors in Minnesota, but there is a constant push and pull, an oversight, a reliance on the expertise that the engineer brings as well as the contractor. And the piece about the licensure of an engineer is really important. And both engineers I mentioned earlier are licensed. I am licensed. As part of our licensure, we commit to the ethical oversight and to be a good public steward of the public's investment. So we can watch Mr. Korzelius manage this project. He has a duty based on his licensure to see that. Now, I will have to say that was missing on the Southwest Light Rail project. The project manager for that, for most of the project, was not a licensed engineer. And whether they bring that expertise or not, having that licensure is really important. And so whether you're licensed or just competent, the engineer plays a huge role in how the project is built, how the contractor is managed, and how the expertise of everybody on the job is fully exploited to make sure that the project goes well. So I'm really happy that we have really a depth of bench at MnDOT. We have engineers with decades of experience are going to help manage this, and I will be watching and making sure that Met Council brings in a staff person that we can rely on to fulfill that role also. So thank you for letting me have a few minutes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Can we just hear 60 seconds on ridership?
Yeah,
Thanks.
Mr. Chair, members, thank you. I would actually start by saying in March, the council will be presented with Network Now, a plan to increase service between now and 2027 by 35% as a way to continue to grow back post-pandemic. It also permanently ends many of the commuter-style routes that ran in the morning and a few routes in the afternoon that have simply cratered since COVID for reasons cited by this committee. This is an important step in both changing who we are and what we do to operate day-to-day while serving people in the ways they are most asking to be served. All-day service across the region that provides greater mobility into the evenings and weekends. Ridership specifically is back at about 2/3 of pre-pandemic levels. That was hit harder on the local bus side than it was across our core metro system. When I say metro system, I would mean the colored lines and the lettered lines, which have responded back faster. The green line is the largest workhorse of our system, almost 30,000 rides a day. The blue line comes in next, followed by the D line. And the D line is an example of a successful arterial bus rapid transit line delivering 14,000 rides a day. And so we do see a mix of modes delivering mobility to our communities. We see a need to continue to invest as we move forward. We're on a trend with nationally where we've been about 2 to 5% behind national peer agencies in many cases around our size in terms of coming back from the pandemic. We were over-indexed towards commuter-based models at the outset. And so we were hit harder like the most commuter-oriented systems. And as we're changing to make sure we're there all the time, all hours of the day, that's been a part of our growth back. So thank you for letting me share 3 minutes, not one, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you. All right. Anything further, members? All right. I think we are at a concluding point. We're back on Wednesday. We will have, I think, 6 bills. One from me. That might be my, no, I have presented one bill already in this committee. A couple from Senator Johnson Stewart, and then and we'll be hearing a little bit around our needs in for the State Patrol. All right, we got 3 bills on that subject. All right, with that, members, we are adjourned. Thank you.